High above the plains of Gondor, beneath a sky dusted with countless stars, rises the towering white city of Minas Tirith, its 7 levels gleaming like a crown of pearl against the night. For centuries, travelers have journeyed from distant lands, drawn by whispers of its unshakable strength, its hidden halls filled with the echoes of kings and stewards, and the quiet mysteries sleeping within its ancient stones. Tonight, we step into those very streets, where every shadow holds a story, and every breath of wind carries the weight of ages past. Whether you're listening from a bustling city or a quiet countryside, whether the moon is just rising or midnight has already settled over your world, we'd love to know, where does this journey find you? Let us know in the comments below, and let's begin together. Picture this: a lone traveler, road-worn and weary, approaches the great gate of Minas Tirith, his cloak frayed by miles of wandering. The guards, their armor etched with the silver tree of Gondor, watch him closely, not with suspicion, but with the quiet recognition of one who carries more than just dust on their boots. There's something in his eyes, a flicker of purpose, a question buried so deep, even he may not yet know what it is. And as he crosses the threshold, the city seems to breathe around him, as if the very stones remember every soul who's ever walked these paths. This is more than a city of stone and mortar. Minas Tirith is a living memory, a fortress built not just against armies, but against the slow erosion of time itself. Its walls have witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, the whispers of prophecies, and the quiet courage of those who stood when darkness pressed close. Tonight, we'll wander its winding streets, trace the echoes of its heroes, and uncover the secrets that linger in its towers and vaults, stories of hope, resilience, and the unbroken light that has guided Gondor through its darkest hours. So settle in, close your eyes, and let the history of Minas Tirith wrap around you like an old, familiar cloak. The journey begins now. The elderly scholar gestures toward the towering walls, his fingers tracing the air as if following the lines of history itself. Minas Tirith was not always known by this name, he murmurs, his voice a whisper of parchment and time. In its first days, when the sun still rose unshadowed over Gondor, it was called Minas Anor, the Tower of the Sun. A beacon, you see, raised by the hands of the Númenóreans, those who fled the drowning of their homeland across the sea. He pauses, letting the weight of those words settle like dust in the quiet air between them. The traveler listens, his gaze drifting up the city's sheer white cliffs, each level a testament to an age long past. They built not just a fortress, the scholar continues, but a promise. Stone upon stone, tier upon tier, carved to defy the creeping darkness. Men of skill and women of unwavering will labored beneath the sun and stars, their chisels singing against the rock. Some say the very mortar was mixed with tears not of sorrow, but of defiance. A faint smile touches his lips, though his eyes remain shadowed. And yet, for all its grandeur, the greatest secrets of this city do not lie in its towers, but beneath them. The traveler leans closer, the firelight flickering in his eyes. Beneath, he echoes. The scholar nods slowly, lowering his voice further. Deep below the 7th gate, where the echoes of ancient footsteps still linger, there are chambers sealed before the first king ever took his throne. Some claim they hold relics of Númenor itself, others whisper of darker things, buried when the world was younger. He exhales, shaking his head, but no map leads there now. Only the stones remember the way. A silence stretches between them, filled only by the distant murmur of the city, above voices, laughter, the clatter of hooves on cobblestones. Life, unaware of what sleeps below, the scholar's hands tremble as he folds them in his lap. Minas Tirith stands because it was never meant to fall, he says at last. But even the strongest walls have their cracks. The scholar's voice grows warmer now, his words painting the air with gold as he speaks of Gondor's zenith, when the banners of the white tree fluttered proudly in every breeze, and the streets of Minas Tirith hummed with life. Imagine the lower circles at dawn, he says, his eyes distant with memory. Bakers pulling loaves from ovens, their crusts crackling like fire. Merchants from distant lands unloading spices that turned the very air sweet. And the children, the children darting through the crowds, their laughter bouncing off the walls like sunlight. He chuckles, folding his hands. Every corner had its music. The clang of the smiths' hammers, the ballad singers by the fountains, even the arguments of scholars in the archives, all of it woven into something greater. For a time, Gondor was not just a kingdom, it was a living song. The traveler leans in, captivated. And the kings, he asks, wise as the first lords of Númenor, the scholar replies, pride threading his words. They walked among the people, not as distant rulers, but as stewards of a shared light. In the great hall of the citadel, they feasted not just with nobles, but with farmers who'd brought the season's first harvest, with shipwrights who'd braved the Anduin storms. There was a trust then, a sense that every hand calloused or clean helped build the realm. His fingers tapped the table, a faint rhythm, but songs fade, traveler. Even the sweetest ones, a shadow passes over his face. The first cracks were small, a missed tribute here, a whispered grievance there. Then came the day the eastern emissaries arrived, their gifts a little too lavish, their words a little too smooth. The king welcomed them, as was his way, but trust, once stretched thin, is hard to mend. The scholar's voice drops, as if the walls themselves might listen. They called it diplomacy, a sharing of knowledge, yet what slipped through those gates was not just silk and silver, but a poison, a doubt. The lords began to question each other. The people noticed, and where trust falters, shadows grow bold. The traveler shivers despite the fire's warmth, so it wasn't an army that brought Gondor low. The scholar shakes his head slowly. Oh, the armies came later, but the first blow that was struck long before in the quiet moments, a hesitation where there should have been resolve, a silence where there should have been truth. The mightiest towers, he murmurs, gazing up at the city's gleaming heights, are built stone by stone, and so they fall. Outside, a gust of wind rattles the shutters, carrying with it the distant cry of a watchman's horn. The scholar's next words are barely audible. Listen closely, traveler, stones remember, and if you're very still, you can hear them whispering the same lesson, over and over. Nothing golden lasts forever. Not without vigilance, not without light. The scholar's fingers tighten around his cup, his knuckles pale as bone. Ostrelieth, he breathes, and the name hangs in the air like smoke. Once, its bridges spanned the Anduin like threads of silver, linking east and west. Its domes caught the sunset and threw it back in flames of gold. But when the shadow came, it did not march, it seeped. Through cracked stones, through whispered lies, through the hearts of men who thought themselves unbreakable. His voice drops to a hush. The night Ostrelieth fell, the river itself burned. The traveler sees it suddenly, not as history, but as a living nightmare. Towers crumbling like sandcastles against a black tide. Arrows hissing through the air, their fletching alight, tracing arcs of fire over the water. And the people, oh, the people. A mother clutching a child to her chest as she stumbles over cobbles slick with blood. A soldier, his sword arm shattered, using his last breath to shove a boat full of survivors into the current. The Anduin, that ancient, steadfast river, choked with wreckage and the echoes of screams. The scholar's next words come slowly, weighed down by grief. One man made it to the eastern shore, a captain, though his rank meant nothing then. His cloak was charred, his face streaked with ash and something darker, despair, perhaps. But in his arms, wrapped in what remained of his banner, he carried a chest, no larger than a loaf of bread. A pause, the fire pops, sending up a shower of sparks. They say when he staggered through the gates of Minas Tirith, the chest was taken straight to the citadel, that not even the steward dared open it. Only one thing is certain, whatever lay inside was precious enough to risk 1,000 lives to save. The traveler's breath catches, and now, could it still be here? A ghost of a smile touches the scholar's lips. This city has more secrets than stones, my friend. Walk its lower levels, and you'll find alleys that twist like riddles, doors that haven't opened in an age. But the true treasures, he leans in, his voice barely audible. They are kept where only the desperate or the doomed would dare to look. The vaults beneath the white tower have no maps, no guards, only whispers of things that hum in the dark, of locks that open for blood instead of keys. Outside, the wind moans through the city's high towers, carrying with it the faint, metallic tang of rain. The scholar sits back, his face half lost in shadow. Ostrelieth fell because men forgot what they were defending. Not just walls, not just gold, something older, something that could fit in a chest. He meets the traveler's gaze. Find it, and you'll understand why Minas Tirith still stands when all others have turned to dust. A distant bell tolls, its sound muffled by the weight of centuries. Somewhere in the city above, a door creaks shut, or perhaps it's opening. The scholar's hands tremble as he reaches for an old, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. After the last king rode to war and never returned, he begins, his voice hushed. The stewards took up the mantle of rule, not as heirs, but as guardians. For generations, they kept the throne empty, the seat polished, the crown untouched. A promise, you see, that one day the rightful king would come again. He traces a finger down a list of names inked in fading script. Some were wise, like Mardel, who steadied Gondor when the earth itself seemed to shake with grief. Others were proud, like Denethor II, who let his fear gnaw at him until there was little left but bitterness. The traveler studies the names, each one a story of its own. And the one who hid something, he presses. The scholar's eyes flicker with something unreadable. Echthellion, he murmurs, not the first of his name, nor the last, but perhaps the most cunning. He walked these streets as a man who carried secrets in his very shadow. when the enemy's whispers grew too loud, when even the White Council doubted Gondor's strength, he did not raise armies or build higher walls. He buried something so dangerous, so precious, it could not be trusted to vault or tower. A cold draft snakes through the room, making the candle flames dance. Where, the traveler asks, though part of him already fears the answer. Where no steward would dare to tread, the scholar replies, beneath the hallows, where the kings lie in silence. A tomb unmarked, yet older than the city itself. Echthellion had it reopened, its depths altered, its purpose repurposed. He leans closer, his breath stirring the dust on the table. Some say he hid a weapon. Others claim it was a burden, a thing meant to pass only to the true king. But the darkest rumors whisper of a pact, a choice sealed in stone, to keep Gondor standing at any cost. The traveler feels the weight of those words settle in his bones, and if it's found now, the scholar's voice cracks like dry parchment. Then the age of stewardship ends. For better or worse, outside, the wind howls through the city's heights, a sound almost like a warning, or perhaps a call. The scholar closes the book with a soft thud. Seek it if you must, traveler, but remember, some doors, once opened, cannot be shut again. The scholar leads the traveler up the winding streets of Minas Tirith, past torchlit archways and silent courtyards, until they reach a place where even the wind seems to hold its breath, the court of the fountain. Moonlight spills across the white stones, pooling around the gnarled roots of a tree, so ancient its branches claw at the sky like skeletal fingers. The white tree. Once, its blossoms filled the air with a fragrance so pure, it was said to heal weary hearts. Now, its trunk is hollowed by time, its leaves long turned to dust. Every steward has tended it, the scholar whispers, running a hand along the withered bark, watered it with their own hands, whispered prayers into its dead wood. For as the tree fades, so too does Gondor. His voice cracks, or so we believed. The traveler steps closer, drawn by something he cannot name. The tree should be cold, lifeless, yet as his fingers brush against it, a warmth pulses beneath the surface, faint but unmistakable. He jerks his hand back, startled. It's alive. Not yet, the scholar murmurs, but not entirely gone either. He crouches, brushing aside fallen petals from a lesser tree nearby. A young sapling, barely knee-high, its leaves a fragile green. This one was smuggled from the north years ago, hidden in a merchant's cart beneath bolts of cloth, the last of its line. He smiles, though his eyes are wet. They say when the true king returns, the old tree will bloom anew. Until then, we keep this one secret. Even hope must sometimes hide. The traveler stares at the sapling, its roots coiled tight in the shadow of its ancestor. And if no king comes, the scholar's gaze drifts to the east, where the horizon lingers like a held breath. Then we tend the seedling anyway, for Gondor. For the day, the world needs reminding that some things, even withered, even forgotten, still hold a spark. A breeze stirs, carrying the scent of distant rain. The old tree's branches creak, as if answering a question no one dared to speak aloud. The scholar's fingers tighten around the edge of the table, his voice dropping to a hush, as if the very walls might carry his words to unwanted ears. The siege began not with fire, but with silence, he says, his gaze fixed on some unseen horror beyond the room. The skies darkened first, not with storm clouds, but with wings. great flocks of carrion birds, circling like vultures over a dying beast. Then came the drums, a sound so deep it shook the stones beneath our feet, as if the earth itself were mourning what was to come. The traveler feels the memory press against him like a weight, the stench of burning pitch, the screams of horses, the relentless thud of siege engines hurling boulders the size of houses against the gates. The defenders, he asks, though he fears the answer. Farmers with hunting bows, the scholar whispers, blacksmiths wielding hammers instead of swords. Children too young to lift a shield, carrying water to quench the fires, and above them all, the steward, standing on the battlements like a man already carved from stone. A shudder runs through him. They say Denethor's eyes burned brighter than the flames below, but it wasn't courage that kept him there. It was despair. He'd seen something in the Palantir, some glimpse of doom, and it hollowed him out like a rotten tree. The scholar's voice cracks as he leans closer, and then, just as the gates splintered, the horns. Not Gondor's, but a call none had heard in an age. The Rohirrim, riding as if the wind itself bore them. Their king's banner flew like a golden flame, and for one breathless moment, the tide turned. His knuckles whiten, but even light can drown, traveler. The enemy's reserve surged forward, a black tide of steel and snarling beasts, and in the chaos, something slipped into the city. Not through the gates, not over the walls, through the shadows where no watchers stood. The traveler's pulse quickens. What kind of thing? A whisper. A shape. Some say it wore a man's face. Others claim it had no face at all, but it moved with purpose, straight toward the citadel. The scholar's next words are barely audible. That night, as the battle raged, 6 guards vanished from the vaults beneath the white tower. No blood, no struggle, just empty armor, still warm to the touch. Outside, the wind moans through the alleyways, carrying with it the distant echo of a bell, or perhaps a scream, stretched thin by time. The scholar exhales slowly. When dawn came, the enemy was driven back. The city stood, but the cost. His voice trails off, his eyes drifting to a narrow window where the first pale light of morning bleeds through. Some wounds never close, and some secrets, once buried, should stay that way. A silence settles between them, thick as the dust on forgotten tombs. Somewhere high above, a lone bird cries, a lonely sound, like a question no one can answer. The scholar hesitates, his fingers tightening around the armrest of his chair, as if it might anchor him against the tide of the traveler's resolve. The archives, he murmurs, are not a place for the faint of heart. Yet something in the traveler's gaze, a hunger too sharp to ignore, makes him sigh and rise, the old wood groaning beneath his weight. Follow then, but tread softly, the past has teeth. They descend a staircase so narrow their shoulders brush the walls, each step worn smooth by centuries of secret footsteps. The air grows thick with the scent of vellum and damp stone, of ink fading into oblivion. At the bottom, the scholar presses his palm against a door, carved with runes, so weathered they seem less like words than scars. It creaks open, revealing a chamber choked with shadows and the ghostly shapes of shelves bowed under the weight of time. Scrolls lie in drifts, their edges crumbling like autumn leaves. Books bound in cracked leather whisper as the drafts stir their pages. The traveler steps forward, his breath shallow, as if the very dust might scatter at the sound. His fingers hover over a shelf, then alight on a scroll tied with a ribbon the color of dried blood. Unrolled, it reveals a map, not of the city above, but of the labyrinth beneath. Rivers of ink trace tunnels that coil like serpents, chambers marked with symbols that make his pulse quicken. One passage, drawn in a darker hand, leads to a door no wider than a man's shoulders, labeled with a single word: remember. The scholar's voice is a rasp at his ear. Put it back. That path was sealed for a reason. But the traveler's eyes burn with a light. The scholar knows too well the same fire that once drove kings to ruin and fools to glory. What's down there? Nothing that belongs to the living. The scholar snaps, snatching the map. The parchment trembles in his grip. Men have gone seeking what lies beneath before. They return changed, if they return at all, their eyes empty, their voices full of names no one recognizes. He rolls the scroll with shaking hands, tucking it into the folds of his robe. Some truths are knives, traveler. They cut the hand that holds them. Outside, the wind howls through the city's heights, a sound like distant laughter. The traveler stares at the empty space where the map had been, his fingers curling into fists. The archives seem to lean closer, the whispers of 1,000 forgotten voices pressing against his skin. He doesn't need the map. The shape of the secret is already searing itself into his mind. A door, a darkness, and the terrible, tantalizing question of what waits on the other side. The scholar watches him, grief pooling in the lines of his face. He's seen that look before. It never ends well. The torchlight gutters as the traveler edges forward, the map's brittle parchment crackling in his grip. The passage narrows until the walls press close enough to taste the salt of old stone, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and something older, iron, maybe, or the ghost of long cold fires. The symbols on the door loom suddenly from the darkness, carved so deep they seem less like markings than wounds. They twist under the flickering light, shapes that dance at the edge of recognition. A crown, a tree, a sword broken across a star. His breath catches. These are no mason's marks. They were made by hands that remembered Númenor. The handle is colder than winter, its metal pitted with age. For a heartbeat, he hesitates not from fear, but from the weight of what whispers through these stones. Cities have bones, and this is Minas Tirith's marrow. Then the door groans open on hinges that haven't stirred in centuries, and the darkness beyond exhales. The chamber is smaller than he expected, its ceiling lost in shadow. But at its center, bathed in a shaft of pallid light from some unseen crack above, sits a chest. Not gold, not jewels, just plain, weathered oak, bound with bands of tarnished silver. Yet the air around it hums, a vibration that sets his teeth on edge. He's seen treasures before, hoards guarded by dragons and tombs lined with sapphires. This is different. This thing waits, a step closer. The torch sputters, its flame bending away from the chest as if repelled. His shadow stretches long and trembling across the floor, and for the first time, he notices the grooves cut into the stone, channels radiating outward like spokes of a wheel, all leading back to the chest. Dried rust stains their edges, not iron, something darker. The scholar's warnings coil in his mind like smoke. Some doors, once opened, but the chest's latch is simple, unadorned. No lock, no key, just a choice. His fingers brush the lid, and the wood thrums beneath his touch, a heartbeat out of time with his own. Then, silence. The torch snuffs out. In the blackness, the chest clicks open. The door groans inward, its protest swallowed by the vast silence beyond. The chamber yawns before the traveler, a perfect circle of black stone, its walls carved with faces worn smooth by time. Not statues, but impressions, as if the rock itself remembered those who had stood here before. The air moves, though there is no wind, and the torch in his hand flickers wildly, casting phantoms across the ceiling. Then, like mist rising from a winter river, the visions begin. A king kneels in the center of the room, his crown shattered at his feet, his hands clasped around the hilt of a broken sword. A woman in armor, her face streaked with soot, shouts orders to unseen soldiers. A child clutches a white stone to their chest, weeping into the hollow of their palms. The images come faster now, banners burning, gates buckling, a lone soldier planting a sapling in blood-soaked earth. The traveler staggers, his breath ragged, as the past presses against him from all sides. Then the voice, not from the walls, not from the air, but from somewhere deeper, as if the bones of the mountain have learned to speak. You seek answers, it murmurs, and the words are less sound than vibration, humming through the traveler's ribs. But answers are burdens. Look closer. The visions shift, not kings now, but cooks feeding starving refugees from their own scant rations. A blacksmith working through the night to mend shields for strangers. A scribe copying scrolls by candlelight, his fingers numb with cold, ensuring knowledge outlives the darkness. The voice softens, almost tender. Stone crumbles. Steel shatters, but this, a farmer's calloused hands cradling seeds, a healer singing to a dying enemy. This is the fortress that cannot fall. The traveler's knees strike the floor, the impact echoing through the chamber. The weight of it all, the love, the loss, the stubborn, unyielding hope, threatens to break him. Above, the ghostly faces blur and merge into one, his own reflection, flickering in the torchlight. The voice sighs, a sound like leaves settling after a storm. You see now, the city lives not in its towers, but in the choice to rise each dawn and build again. The torch gutters, the visions fade, yet the chamber feels lighter somehow, as if the stones themselves have breathed out after centuries of holding their silence. The traveler rises, his hands no longer empty. He carries something out of the dark with him, not a weapon, not a secret, but a truth as simple and unshakable as the roots of mountains. Somewhere high above, a bell begins to toll, its voice clear and strong, ringing out over the white city once more. The parchment crackles in the traveler's hands, brittle with age, yet humming with an urgency that prickles his skin. The ink is faded, the script archaic, but the words pulse like a heartbeat. By stone and spirit, I swear, not alone shall Gondor stand, nor in shadow shall her strength be kept. Let no hand toil unheard, no voice cry unanswered, for the tower's light is the sum of all fires kindled beneath it. The signature beneath is little more than a smear of time, but the weight of it presses into his palms, the first steward's vow, not to hoard power, but to scatter it like seeds. A cold clarity settles over him, the scholar's warnings about the vaults, the whispers of things buried too deep. They weren't guarding treasures, they were hiding the absence of one. The real secret of Minas Tirith isn't locked in a chest or carved into some forgotten tomb. It's been scattered, misplaced like fragments of a shattered mirror, in the pride of lords who thought wisdom belonged only to the high towers, in the fear that made men clutch their knowledge like swords. The divisions between the circles, the silence between neighbor and neighbor, these were the cracks the enemy had seeped through, not the ones in the stone. The traveler rolls the scroll with deliberate care, his fingers tracing the edge where the parchment has worn thin. He thinks of the baker who slipped him an extra loaf at dawn, her hands flour dusted but her eyes sharp with unspoken questions. The mason repairing the lower walls, his songs half lost beneath the clang of hammers. Even the scholar, hunched over his books like a miser over gold, yet starving for someone to truly listen. The oath wasn't a relic, it was a key. Above him, the city murmurs voices layered upon voices, a tapestry frayed but not yet broken. Somewhere, a child laughs. Somewhere else, a door creaks open. The traveler tucks the scroll into his tunic, feeling the outline of the words against his ribs. He knows now why the visions showed him cooks and scribes, farmers and healers. The strength of Minas Tirith was never in its white walls or its hidden vaults. It was in the 1,000 hands that had built it, the 1,000 more that had kept it standing when the world turned dark. The first step is the hardest, not toward the citadel, not toward the scholars' halls, but down into the streets where the cobbles are worn smooth by generations of footsteps. He'll start with the baker, then the mason, then whoever listens. The scroll is brittle, but the oath is fire, and fire spreads. The traveler finds the scholar where he always does, hunched over his books in the dim glow of a dying candle, his fingers tracing lines of text, like a blind man reading Braille. But tonight, the air between them crackles with something sharper than silence. The traveler drops the scroll onto the table, its edges curling like the fingers of a waking hand. "You knew," he says, and the words aren't an accusation, just a weight laid bare. For a long moment, the scholar doesn't move. Then his shoulders sag, the fight draining out of him like sand through an hourglass. Not all of it, he admits, his voice frayed at the edges. Only fragments, stories passed down from steward to steward, each one adding another lock, another layer of silence. His fingers brush the parchment, flinching as if it burns. We thought we were protecting them, the people, the city. A bitter laugh escapes him, as if truth were a blade they couldn't be trusted to hold. The traveler leans forward, the candlelight carving shadows into his face. And if the enemy comes again, if the walls shake and the skies darken, will lies hold them back? Something in the scholar's eyes fractures. He looks older suddenly, the lines on his face deepening into crevices. Fear is a poor foundation for courage. He murmurs, more to himself than the traveler. I watched my father hide maps from the very masons who repaired the gates, saw stewards whisper strategies behind closed doors while the baker's son, barely 14, died holding a spear he'd never been taught to use. His breath hitches. We called it wisdom, but it was just another kind of cowardice. The traveler doesn't offer comfort, doesn't need to. The truth hangs between them now, heavy and undeniable. Outside, the wind carries the scent of rain and the distant murmur of the city. A drunk's laughter, a mother's lullaby, the clatter of dice in a guard's idle game. Life, stubborn and unbroken, carrying on beneath the weight of secrets it never asked to bear. The scholar swipes at his eyes with a sleeve gone threadbare at the cuffs. You'll take it to them then, the oath, not just me. The traveler gathers the scroll, his grip firm. We both will. Start with the archives, then the guilds. The taverns, anywhere people gather. He nods toward the window, where the first light of dawn bleeds into the sky. They deserve to know what they're defending. Not just stones, but the promise in them. The scholar hesitates, his hand hovering over the candle as if to snuff it out. Then, slowly, he lifts it instead, the flame trembling but bright. Then we'd best begin, he says, and for the first time in years, his voice doesn't sound tired. It sounds like a man waking up. The whispers start in the lower circles, slipping from lips to ears like sparks along a fuse. A baker pauses mid-knead, flour dusting his arms as he leans closer to the mason's hissed account of the traveler's words. A washerwoman clutches her linens tighter, her eyes darting to the guards patrolling the gate. The oath, she breathes. After all this time, by sundown, the story has twisted into a dozen shapes. Some say the traveler carries the lost king's seal. Others claim he's unearthed a weapon to shatter the enemy's armies. But beneath the rumors thrums a single, dangerous question. What if it's true? In the smoky gloom of the blacksmith's cup, a barrel-chested armorer slams his tankard onto the table, sending foam sloshing over the rim. Fool's errand, he growls. We've held this city by blood and sweat, not dusty scrolls, but the young apprentice beside him, her fingers still blistered from forging arrowheads, shakes her head. Then why, she murmurs, do the stewards keep their halls locked tighter than their coffers? The room falls still. No one answers. Up in the citadel's shadowed corridors, the traveler feels the weight of their doubt like stones in his pack. He watches a group of scribes huddle over their parchments, their quills scratching out careful copies of the oath. One, a woman with ink-stained sleeves, meets his gaze and doesn't look away. They are afraid, she says simply, not of the enemy, of being wrong. And she's right. Fear slithers through the city's veins, cold and familiar. The guildmasters clutch their privileges like lifelines. The guards eye the lower circles with fresh suspicion. Even the scholar hesitates at the threshold of the archives, his hand hovering over the latch as if it might bite. This will divide them, he warns. The traveler knows the cost. He's seen it in the visions. The way trust, once broken, leaves cracks no mortar can mend. But he's also seen the other truth, the one etched into the roots of the white tree. A city isn't stones. It's the hands that raise them. So he steps into the torchlight of the bustling square, the scholar's scroll unfurled in his grip, and lets the words do what they've always been meant to: burn. The first shout comes from the back. Liar. Then another, louder. Prove it. But then a voice the traveler doesn't expect, the baker's wife, her apron streaked with jam, her chin lifted. I'll hear him, she declares, and just like that, the dam cracks. Not with a roar, but with a whisper, as 100 forgotten promises stir beneath the cobblestones. The hall of the citadel is thick with the scent of wax and wine, the air humming with the low murmur of voices that have spent too many years speaking in circles. The traveler stands at the center, the scholar just behind him, their shadows thrown long by the torches flickering in their sconces. Around them, the city's leaders sit in stiff-backed chairs, stewards in their embroidered robes, captains with their swords across their knees, guildmasters gripping the arms of their seats like men braced for a storm. The traveler unrolls the oath across the table, its edges curling like old leaves, and waits for the silence to settle. It doesn't last. A steward with a beard like frosted iron slams his fist onto the table. This is folly. The people cannot be trusted with such things. They will panic, or worse, turn on us. His voice is sharp, honed by decades of giving orders no one dared question. But the traveler doesn't flinch. They already have, he says simply, and the room goes still. They just don't know it yet. A woman in a scribe's ink stained robes leans forward, her eyes bright with something that might be hope or fear. And if the enemy hears of this, if they learn we've abandoned the old ways, we haven't abandoned them. The scholar cuts in, his voice steadier than he feels. We've remembered them. The oath was never meant to be hidden. It was meant to be shared. The arguments come faster then, voices overlapping like waves against a crumbling shore. Old grudges rise like specters, the masons accusing the merchants of hoarding grain during the last siege, the guards blaming the stewards for sending their sons to die in battles they didn't understand. The traveler lets the storm rage, his fingers pressed to the parchment, feeling the words beneath them like a pulse. Then a chair scrapes back. The captain who stands is neither young nor old, his face lined with the marks of too many winters on the walls. When he speaks, his voice is quiet, but it cuts through the noise like a blade. I swore an oath too, he says, to defend this city, but I always thought that meant the stones. The gates, the towers. He shakes his head, his gaze sweeping the room. It doesn't. It means the baker who gives his last loaf to a starving child, the healer who stays up all night stitching wounds, the farmer who plants seeds in soil, still stained with blood. He steps forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, not in threat, but in promise. If we don't trust them with the truth, then what in the name of the white tree are we even defending? For a heartbeat, no one moves. Then, one by one, others rise. A blacksmith with arms like tree trunks, a weaver whose hands still tremble from the last attack, even the ink-stained scribe, her chin lifted in defiance. The firelight catches their faces, and for the first time in years, the hall doesn't feel like a tomb. It feels like a forge, hot, bright, and alive with the sound of something being remade. The traveler exhales, the weight in his chest easing just a little. The road ahead is long, and the enemy still lurks beyond the mountains. But here now, in this room full of raised voices and unclenched fists, he sees it, the first fragile thread of a city stitching itself back together. The first green shoot on the white tree is no thicker than a child's finger, its pale leaves unfurling like hesitant prayers in the dawn light. The gardener who discovers it drops to his knees, his calloused hands hovering over it as if it might vanish like mist. Word spreads faster than fire through dry grass, through hushed conversations in the bakeries, through the clatter of tools in the masons' yards, through the hushed hymns of washerwomen kneeling by the fountains. By midday, a crowd gathers in the court of the fountain, their faces tilted upward, not toward the citadel's towering heights, but toward that fragile sprig of life. Someone begins to weep. No one asks why. The traveler watches from the shadows of a colonnade, his arms crossed, his back against the sun-warmed stone. He sees the way the people touch each other, hands brushing shoulders, fingers interlacing, a mother lifting her son to see the miracle. These are the same hands that hauled stones to rebuild the lower walls last week, the same voices that argued over how much truth the city could bear. Now they're silent, united by something older than fear. A breeze stirs, carrying the scent of wet earth and something sweet, not the perfume of blossoms, but the promise of them. Across the courtyard, the scholar stands beside the young scribe from the archives, her ink-stained fingers clutching his sleeve. "I told you," he murmurs, his voice rough with something like wonder. The tree was never dead, only waiting. The scribe nods, her eyes bright. "Like the oath," she says, and the scholar laughs, a sound so light it seems to startle the pigeons roosting in the eaves. The repairs to the city's walls are slower, but no less certain. Stones are set back into place, yes, but so are other things. The baker shares his recipe for honey cakes with the butcher's apprentice. The guards begin their patrols with nods instead of scowls, and in the taverns, the songs grow louder, bolder, as if the singers remember they have nothing left to hide. The traveler sees it all, the way a blacksmith pauses to mend a child's broken toy, the way the stewards now walk the lower circles without their usual escort, their ears bent toward the complaints of the fishmongers and weavers. On the seventh evening, the traveler climbs to the highest rampart, where the wind carries the salt of the distant sea. Below him, Minas Tirith gleams in the twilight, its lanterns flickering to life like stars mirrored in still water. The scholar finds him there, his robes smelling of parchment and rosemary. "You're leaving," he says, not a question. The traveler nods, his gaze tracing the silhouette of the mountains against the horizon. "The city doesn't need me anymore." The scholar smiles, his wrinkles deepening. "It never did," he admits, "but you helped it remember that." He presses something into the traveler's hand, a small white stone, smooth as bone, warm from his pocket. "For the road, so you don't forget, either." The traveler pockets the stone, his fingers brushing the scroll still tucked against his ribs. Somewhere in the streets below, a lute begins to play, its notes rising through the gathering dark. He doesn't say goodbye. The city has already turned back to its work, to living, to growing, to writing its next chapter in light instead of shadows. And that, more than any farewell, feels like a victory. The morning dawns clear and cool, the air crisp with the memory of autumn's first breath. The streets of Minas Tirith, usually alive with the clamor of daily life, hum instead with a quieter energy, a sense of gathering, of stillness before the storm. By the time the sun climbs high enough to gild the uppermost towers, the city's squares and courtyards are thick with people. They stand shoulder to shoulder, their faces turned not toward the citadel's high seat, but toward the traveler who steps onto the worn stones of the fountain court with the ancient oath clutched in his hands. Silence spreads like a ripple as he unrolls the parchment, its edges trembling slightly in the breeze. For a heartbeat, the only sound is the whisper of fabric as a child tugs at her mother's sleeve, her eyes wide with unspoken questions. Then the traveler begins to speak, his voice steady, carrying over the crowd like a bell's clear note. By stone and spirit, he recites, the words older than the city itself. Not alone shall Gondor stand. A murmur runs through the crowd, a rustle of recognition. The blacksmith's apprentice, his hands still stained with soot, mouths the next line before the traveler even speaks it. "Nor in shadow shall her strength be kept." The words catch, spreading like flame through dry grass. A washerwoman, her knuckles raw from scrubbing, lifts her chin and joins in. Then the mason, the baker, the guardsmen who once scoffed at scrolls and speeches. Their voices weave together, hesitant at first, then stronger, bolder, until the very air seems to vibrate with the weight of their promise. High above, a gust of wind parts the clouds and sunlight spills across the city in a sudden, golden wave. It catches the white trees' new leaves, setting them aglow, and for a moment, the traveler swears he sees the faces of those long gone. Kings and stewards, warriors and healers, their smiles flickering at the edges of the crowd. The scholar, standing at the base of the tree, presses a hand to his chest, as if to steady his heart. The scribe beside him weeps openly, her tears gleaming in the light. The traveler's gaze drifts eastward, where the mountains bite at the horizon. The enemy is still out there, biding its time. The walls, though mended, will never be unbroken. But as the voices rise around him, as the oath becomes not just words, but a living thing, thrumming in the cobblestones and the very bones of the city, he knows this. Minas Tirith was never just a fortress. It was always its people, and today they remember. The sun climbs higher, the light deepening to a honeyed gold. Somewhere in the crowd, a child laughs, the sound bright and unburdened. The traveler closes his eyes, letting the moment settle into his skin. When he looks again, the horizon is no longer a threat, just a line waiting to be crossed. The scholar's grip is firm as he clasps the traveler's shoulder, his eyes gleaming with something deeper than gratitude recognition. "You've given us more than an oath," he murmurs, voice thick with the weight of unspoken years. "You've given us back our voices." Around them, the city stirs, the clang of hammers on anvils, the laughter of children chasing pigeons through the square, the distant strains of a lute weaving through the hum of conversation. It's a song the traveler knows well now, the sound of a people no longer whispering. The gates loom ahead, their iron-bound timbers scarred by centuries of siege and weather, yet standing unbroken. The guards nod as he passes, their salutes not for a dignitary, but for a friend. One, a young recruit with a fresh scar across his brow, steps forward, pressing a small loaf wrapped in cloth into the traveler's hands. "For the road," he says, echoing the scholar's gift. The bread is still warm, its crust crackling faintly, smelling of honey and hearth fire, a taste of home offered freely. Beyond the walls, the wind sweeps down from the mountains, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. The traveler pauses, turning for one last look. From this angle, Minas Tirith is no longer a fortress of cold stone, but a living mosaic, the glint of lanterns in the lower circles, the flutter of laundry strung between homes, the distant silhouette of the white tree, its new leaves catching the sun like emerald flames. The scholar was right. The city's strength was never in its height, but in its breadth, in the hands that built it, the voices that filled it, the quiet courage of those who chose again and again to mend what was broken. A bell tolls somewhere high above, its note clear and resonant, rolling over the fields like a promise. The traveler smiles, adjusting his pack. The road ahead is long, winding into the haze of the horizon, but his steps are lighter now, as if the city's song walks with him. Somewhere beyond these plains, other walls crumble, other voices wait to be heard, and he'll carry the oath forward, not as a relic, but as a spark, ready to kindle the next fire, wherever shadows gather. The wind rises, tugging at his cloak like an old friend, urging him onward. This time, he doesn't look back. you.